before the first Marine touched the frozen riverbank outside Moscow before a single drone lifted into the black winter sky. The mission planners already understood one terrifying truth. This would not be like Osaka. Osaka Castle had been wood. The Moscow Kremlin was something else entirely. It was stone. Stone layered over centuries of fear, paranoia, bloodshed, and war. And in February of 1572, it was frozen solid. The Kremlin rose above the snow like a sleeping monster. Red walls stretched across the darkness, nearly 60 feet high and thick enough to survive cannon fire. Towers stood at every angle like watchful giants. Every gate was built as a trap. Even if attackers smashed through the first door, they would be forced into a narrow turning passage while defenders rained death from murder holes above. To the south flowed the frozen Moscow River, to the west, the Neglinaya River. To the east, an enormous moat buried beneath ice and snow. 3 sides protected by water, 1 protected by walls. Inside those walls stood cathedrals glowing beneath moonlight, barracks crowded with soldiers, and at the southwestern edge of the fortress, the private wooden palace of Ivan IV. Ivan the Terrible, the most feared ruler in Russia, a man so consumed by suspicion that he changed bedrooms almost every night, a ruler who trusted nobody, not even his own family, not even himself. He slept beside an iron staff and surrounded himself with his personal guard, the Oprichniki, 500 fanatics dressed in black. Men who rode with dog heads tied to their saddles as symbols of terror. Men trained to destroy traitors without mercy. And beyond them waited nearly 2,000 Streltsy musketeers. Every one of them armed. Everyone ready to die for the Tsar. Against all of that stood only 50 modern Marines. 50. No tanks, no artillery, no air support except 1 helicopter waiting far away across the frozen countryside. Just suppressed rifles, night vision, thermal optics, 2 compact drones, explosives, climbing gear, and 1 impossible objective: capture Ivan alive before sunrise. The cold that night cut through everything. Minus 20 degrees, the kind of cold that burned inside your lungs. The frozen river cracked quietly beneath boots as the Marines crossed in total silence. Ahead of them, the Kremlin walls rose from the darkness. Massive still, ancient. The drones floated overhead, nearly invisible against the night sky. Tiny machines from another century, their cameras tracked every patrol route, every tower, every movement. 2 guards walking the northern wall, 4 at the gate tower, 1 patrol circling every 10 minutes. The Marines move. 10 operators separated from the main force and approached the wall. Up close, the climb looked impossible. The brick surface was covered in ice. The temperature made every metal hook brittle. Every grip became a gamble. The first Marine launched his grappling hook upward. It caught. Then another. Slowly, dark figures began climbing toward the top of the Kremlin. Nobody spoke. Only breathing. Only the sound of gloves scraping frozen brick. Halfway up, disaster struck. 1 hook slipped from an icy crack. A Marine suddenly dropped several feet before the safety line snapped tight against the wall. The impact echoed sharply through the frozen air. Every Marine froze. Above them, 1 sentry stopped walking. The Russian guard leaned over the edge, staring into darkness for 15 unbearable seconds. Nobody moved. The Marine hung against the wall, fingers locked to the rope, barely breathing. The sentry narrowed his eyes, but the night hid them. The guard finally turned away, pulling his fur cloak tighter against the cold. The climb continued. Moments later, 2 suppressed rifle shots whispered through the darkness. Both sentries collapsed into the snow without a sound. Ropes dropped over the wall. 10 Marines entered the Kremlin. From the top of the wall, the fortress looked almost unreal. Golden domes shimmered beneath moonlight. Smoke drifted from chimneys. The massive bell tower rose like a pale spear into the sky. And 400 meters away sat Ivan's palace. Between the Marines and their target stood thousands of armed defenders. The infiltration team descended into the fortress and slipped through narrow paths between cathedrals. A patrol approached, 6 Streltsy carrying lanterns. The lantern light blinded them to the darkness beyond. The Marines flattened themselves against stone walls as the patrol passed only feet away. 1 soldier's musket nearly brushed a Marine's shoulder. Still, they remained unseen. At the gate tower, 2 guards stood watch. One smoked a clay pipe. The glowing ember was visible through thermal optics from hundreds of feet away. 2 silent shots. The guards dropped. The Marines lifted the heavy wooden gate beam. Then, the second, the gates creaked open. 40 Marines flooded into the Kremlin. Phase 1 was complete. Now came speed. The drone operator suddenly spotted movement. 2 Oporchniki were approaching the gate for shift change. 3 minutes remained before discovery. The Marines sprinted across the fortress grounds. Snow crunched beneath boots. Then came the shout. The guards had found the bodies. A second later, the bells rang. The sound exploded across Moscow, not church bells, alarm bells, the signal for invasion. Barrack doors burst open. Men grabbed muskets. Torches lit the darkness. In less than 30 seconds, silence became chaos. Wong Streltsy stumbled directly into the Marine column, 5 feet away. The Russian soldier raised his musket. At that distance, a musket ball could shatter bone like a cannon blast. The lead Marine fired first. The Streltsy collapsed backward. 2 more Russians charged with sabers. Blade crashed against Kevlar armor and skidded away. The second stabbed forward with a bayonet fixed to a musket. The weapon caught a Marine's backpack and dragged him sideways. Another Marine fired over his teammate's shoulder. The attacker fell. Then the entire Kremlin erupted. Musket fire flashed from windows, from rooftops, from behind stone corners. Lead balls screamed through the freezing air. One struck a Marine directly in the chest plate. The impact drove him to one knee. Even protected by ceramic armor, it felt like being hit with a sledgehammer. He forced himself back up and kept running. Meanwhile, the Marines returned fire while moving. Automatic rifles thundered through the medieval fortress. The sound bounced between stone walls and cathedral domes until it became something horrifying. The Streltsy had spent their entire lives hearing muskets, single shots, slow reloads, smoke. But this sound never stopped. It roared endlessly through the night like a machine possessed. Fear spread through the defenders, not because they were cowards, because nothing in their world could explain what they were hearing. At last, the Marines reached the palace. 2 Oporchniki stood guard outside the entrance, black coats, sabers drawn. They saw the Americans coming, and unlike everyone else, they did not run. They stood their ground. 2 suppressed shots ended the standoff. The palace doors burst inward. Inside smelled of candle, wax, incense, smoke, and old wood. Icons covered the walls. Narrow hallways twisted through darkness. Somewhere inside this building waited Ivan the Terrible, but the Marines had an advantage nobody in the 16th century could imagine. Thermal optics. The palace walls were wood. Through those walls, every warm human body glowed bright white. The Marines could see defenders hiding behind corners before the defenders even knew they were discovered. On a hallway showed 4 Oporchniki waiting in ambush. The lead Marine fired directly through the wooden wall. 2 guards collapsed instantly. The others charged screaming. One swung a massive Bardish axe so large it nearly filled the corridor. The curved blade smashed across a Marine's helmet, carving a deep groove through the surface and knocking away his night vision goggles. His world vanished into darkness. Another Marine opened fire. The attacker dropped. 2 more guards lunged with sabers. Steel clashed against rifle barrels. One blade sliced through a glove and tore open a Marine's hand. He switched to his sidearm and fired point blank. Room by room, the Marines pushed deeper into the palace. Some doors revealed terrified servants. Others hid armed guards waiting to die. Then they reached Ivan's chamber. A heavy oak door reinforced with iron C4 explosives were planted. The blast shook the corridor, smoke filled the air. The Marines stormed inside. The room was warm. Candles still burned. Wine sat unfinished on the table. The bed was empty. Ivan had escaped. For one moment, the mission teetered on failure. Then the drone operator noticed something strange. On the thermal feed outside the palace, a thin line of warmth stretched beneath the frozen ground warm air. A hidden tunnel. 8 Marines rushed underground through a concealed entrance beneath the palace floor. The remaining operators sprinted toward the riverbank exit. The tunnel was freezing. Stone walls dripped with ice. Ahead, 3 figures appeared: Ivan and 2 loyal guards. Anangard fired a musket. The muzzle flash lit the tunnel for an instant. The musket ball ricocheted wildly off stone. Modern rifles answered immediately. Both guards fell. Ivan ran alone toward the river. He burst onto the frozen bank beneath the moonlight and stopped. Two Marines already waited there, guided by the drone. Ivan the Terrible stood on the ice wearing only a nightrobe and clutching his iron staff. This was the man who terrorized Russia, the man who ordered massacres, the ruler who trusted nobody. For a second, he looked less like a czar and more like an old man trapped in a nightmare he could not understand. He raised the iron staff. One Marine knocked it from his hands. Another fired a taser. 50,000 volts hit the ruler of Russia. Ivan collapsed onto the frozen river. The Tsar of all Russia captured beneath the stars of his own empire. Flex cuffs tightened around his wrists. A hood covered his face. Mission accomplished far behind them. The Kremlin bell still rang. Torches blazed along the walls. Musket fire cracked uselessly into darkness. Minutes later, a Black Hawk helicopter descended onto the frozen river beyond the city. Snow exploded beneath its rotors. Ivan was dragged aboard. The helicopter lifted into the sky, and with it disappeared a man from the 16th century into a future beyond his imagination. The operation lasted only 40 minutes. 50 Marines entered the Kremlin. 50 escaped, 2 wounded, none killed. The defenders lost dozens. The Tsar himself vanished into the night. And in the end, the most powerful fortress in Russia had not fallen because its walls were weak. The walls had actually worked perfectly. They stopped bullets. They slowed attackers. They protected the defenders, but walls built for medieval warfare could not stop technology designed 400 years later. Tiny drones hovering silently above the snow changed everything. Thermal optics turned darkness into daylight. Automatic weapons shattered centuries of battlefield expectations. The Kremlin did not fall because the Marines destroyed it. It fell because they moved faster than history itself. And somewhere high above the frozen forests of Russia, Ivan the Terrible sat inside a roaring machine from another world, unable to understand the century that had defeated him. Because sometimes the deadliest weapon in history is not firepower. It is knowledge, the knowledge of what your enemy cannot even imagine. And that night in 1572, the future came to Moscow.